All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go around to everybody on the team. We're going to also ask a couple people in this distinguished audience to pick a poem from this week's syllabus. And your job is to say which poem and why. And I'll take some notes, and so will Lainey probably, and then we'll decide which one to talk about. All right, so let us start with Sophia DeRose. Pick one and explain why.
Well, yesterday in our class when we did this, I said Sleeping with the Dictionary by Harriet Mullen because I appreciated how it kind of showed this process of learning what's inside words before we know what words themselves mean and contain. But this time around, I'm going to go with Broken English by Erica Hunt for the same reason.
Wow, that was a little curveball there. Great. Allie?
I'm going to go with In a Restless World Like This Is.
Charles Bernstein.
Well, okay. Because I think it's a really nice bridge between week 7 and week 8. And I know we were talking about it a bit in last week's webcast, and we had a really great discussion about it. I think last time we were at the Morgan. Yeah, just a really, really lovely poem.
Fantastic. Good suggestion. Let's go to Kate, and Lainey will be on deck.
Well, I'm hard-pressed to pick a favorite, but I was struck today reading My Emily Dickinson, which I've been reading for 20, maybe 25 years, just by how fresh it remains, how beautiful and apt her descriptions are. And just to call out a few things, passage number 2 really always gets me. And her description of Stein, where she says, she reached in words for new vision formed from the process of naming, as if a first woman were sounding, not describing, space of time filled with moving. And
As
it's
if
just
the first woman were sounding, not describing. Yeah.
space of time filled with moving. It just, every time it hits Stein's nail on the head for me.
Kate, can I ask you a question? We're breaking the little pattern here. Lainey, you'll be on deck. But a quick question, if you don't mind trying for a quick answer. We put Susan Howe in this week. She is affiliated somewhat generationally, but mostly ideationally with her colleagues in this week. And she has been very close to some of the people, especially on the New York side of the language poetry group. And we chose My Emily Dickinson, which is a book of critical prose, for this week in the main syllabus. It's kind of an odd choice. Can you explain why it does fit?
Well, I think it fits in the context of her oeuvre, which is so various. I mean, she writes these long prose explorations of others' work and historical American characters, like Jonathan Edwards, who she keeps coming back to and coming back to. But then she'll also write these very spare pieces or little almost found texts from news sources. She's always reaching at the same people, the same characters, the same subjects, the same undercurrents of American history, but through these various forms. And one of the ways she often does that is with prose. And sometimes she'll reiterate herself or paraphrase herself within different forms. She does that in The Midnight, where she shifts between prose and poetry and not found text, but quoted text. So I just think My Emily Dickinson is emblematic of her searching work.
Thank you, Kate. That's one big reason why she's here in week 8 of ModPo. There's another reason, and that has to do with the fact that we begin the course with Emily Dickinson as a radical poet, and this is a way of bringing it back. And it's not just the Dickinson that we may or may not have gotten in week 1. It is the Dickinson that the week 8 poets are interested in. It's my Emily Dickinson, or their Emily Dickinson. Okay, thank you so much. Lainey is up, and Gabby is on deck.
So Kate mentioned Stein, and yesterday after class, I was talking with William and Jenny about what's the connection between Stein and the language poets, and we started talking about Lynn Hygenian. So a pause arose, something on paper. That idea of writing a life in such a different way that she created through my life is just, it's every time I read it, it still blows my mind away.
Fabulous suggestion. Shantine, are you keeping track of all this somehow? Okay, good. All right, so Gabby's up and Jake is on deck.
Yeah, I'm going to go with kind of a classic, and actually that is getting a bit of shouting out in the YouTube chat, which is My Life by Lynn and Ginny. And I just think it's so beautiful and never really gets old to me. It's really good.
Great suggestion. Jake is up. Dave Poplar on deck.
Well, I want to echo Kate here. I too love Susan Howe's My Emily Dickinson. Like, to me, it's just the North Star of writing in a meaningful way about the works of others in a personal way, and in a way that's poetic and free, and also really super thoughtful. But also, I want to say that Bob Perlman's confession poem, Aliens
from
Have
ModPo
Inhabited
Plus.
Yeah, from ModPo Plus. Aliens have inhabited my aesthetics since the 70s. I mean, to me, it's, I don't know. I hate the word relatable in poetry context, or language is poetry context especially, but I just love it. It's so funny. Me too. Aliens have inhabited my aesthetics also.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jake. Dave Poplar is up. And how about if Emma W., who is holding the mic herself, go next? Pick a favorite. Okay. Dave?
Something from ModPo Plus, another Charles Bernstein poem in particular. I like this for a lot of reasons. It's funny. I mean, it begins each line with a racial or a cultural characterization, and then has a description after it, and it sort of forces us to, reckon with the unstated assumptions that we have, the stereotypes we have about these cultural assumptions, and ultimately. It makes us think how these descriptions might be incongruous, and how these stereotypes may ultimately be, not just silly, but kind of obstacles to really understanding what's going on. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff about this, and it's funny.
Thank you, and that is in the Charles Bernstein section of ModPo Plus. Let's turn to Emma with Jason on deck.
I think I have to go with Chronic Meanings.
Bob Perlman.
Yeah, we talked about that one yesterday in the brick and mortar ModPo, and I just
How lovely to be the brick and mortar ModPo. Say that 5 times fast.
and
Don't-
I just
don't
can't
say it.
think of I won't say it. I can't think of a more powerful way to commemorate the life of someone who died in such an unfair way. Yeah, it breaks my heart every time I've read it in the last week.
It's a pre-elegy for Lee Hickman, and it constrains itself to 5 words in each line, and each sentence, each line is cut off, and it gives you this constant sense of a thought, a life being cut off. So kind of a classic example, or maybe one of the best examples, of how form, especially experimental form, becomes more important than content, because the content is just a bunch of relatively random things that one could say that get cut off. Thank you, Emma, for that suggestion. Jason is up, and Erica is on deck.
Hey, I think the one poem that really stood out to me first as a good entry poem, I think, into the language poets, and is Charles Bernstein's from ModPo Plus, As If the Trees by Their Very Roots Had Hold of Us.
Wow.
Which I'm just fascinated by the title, thinking about Some Trees by John Ashbery, and this poem is really a poem about time and temporality, and is kind of twisting and folding any sort of sense of linear time. And I think I noticed this week by focusing on this poem is how many of the poems this week are dealing with language and time in some sort of way, like especially something like My Life.
My Life, certainly, yeah. Great suggestion. Thank you, Jason. Erica, your thought on this?
So for ModPo Plus and building on what Jason was just saying, thinking about language and time and adding perspective to that equation, I love Leslie Scalapino's coming sequence and the Tyrone Williams from the main syllabus,
Yeah.
particularly written by himself.
Himself, yeah.
And you know what those two poems are doing is they're kind of asking us to question the way the eye moves in time and space and the accuracy of perspective and representation.
Perfect. And that moving eye is, of course, a hallmark of the language school, certainly at the beginning.